Hello, this is S.K. Williams, and today is the 4th of July, 2023. It is the day that the United States of America celebrates Independence Day when it became independent of the Kingdom of Great Britain, due to an acute lack of historical awareness and knowledge. Regrettably, many Americans say they broke free from England, but England was not really an independent country at the time. It was the Kingdom of Great Britain, and in reality, this would to me be more of a tragedy of history. King George III was no tyrant, and the America's founding fathers were hardly heroes. But I shall not dwell upon that today. It is also, you see, my birthday, and I would like to talk to you about something else entirely, something near and dear to me. I have always wanted to time travel. For as far back as I can remember, I have always wanted to time travel, to see different times, to manipulate them, to be a time traveler. It has always been one of my deepest desires and one of my fondest wishes, something urgent and driving within me. And of course, as I grew older, I wished to go back to my own past. Now, most have this sort of fantasy of either going back in time to relive their glory days because now they are older and they can't do as much, or simply because they regret decisions they made, the "if I knew then what I know now, I would have made different choices" mentality. But with me it's different, and for a reason I don't know if I can fully articulate, but I do not merely regret certain decisions that I wish to change, or to revisit my glory days. Indeed, I've wanted this even before I had glory days, and even before I had those regrets. Not simply to time travel, but even to be able to change things I did. Now, many within the tribe of atheists who follow the holy religion of atheism have become aware of me, so do keep in mind what I'm about to say has a just in it. Because even when it comes to my regrets and things I wish to change, I do not just think of them and say, I wish I had done something differently. Rather, I find myself analyzing them, what I could have done differently, going through different scenarios. Now, many do this as well, in the hopes of learning from their mistakes, but with me, in addition to applying what I think to future decisions, I linger. I linger on going back and changing it. And again, this could fit into the category of wishing you could go back to undo your mistakes, but with me it's not simply a wish that I had done something differently. To me, there is an urgency in this thought that I cannot explain, but also a coldness, a methodicalism, questioning myself on, if I did not make that mistake, what would happen? And I don't just mean immediately. Questioning of, if I don't make that mistake, what would happen 10 years later from it? Even on small things, like accidentally hurting someone's feelings. Because there is such a thing as the butterfly effect, you know. Or at least we believe there is. A small change can affect large changes. And these sorts of thoughts, as well as the idea that I'm not just analyzing them to learn from them for future decisions, really proves that I have the mind of a time traveler, I suppose. A desire to alter the very fabric of time, to change events, perhaps to live them 3 or 4 times to see what would happen. I have never really had that mentality, though, of wanting to go back in time and be able to play it as often as I want and do anything at all, including, say, murder, most foul, because I know I could always reset it and nothing would happen permanently. That is not what I want. Even when I play video games, which I don't do very often, I've always hated unnecessary cruelty, even knowing I can reset it. Even playing this game, Gold Miner, always hated killing the little rabbits or moles, or what are they? I've always hated that. And yet, they're not real, and I can reset it. I don't like unnecessary cruelty, even if I can hit the reset button. But sometimes, one decision is morally as right as another, or at least it should so appear. And it has always been one of my interests to traverse time, both to see times long gone and times yet to be. And yet, to know what it was like, perhaps, in the age of the dinosaur. Or should I say ages? Or epochs? Ages, perhaps, best. It is general enough, at least. To go back to the Triassic, the Jurassic, and the Cretaceous, I've always loved dinosaurs. And you see, that's another thing that the tribe that follows the holy religion of atheism, a term I use for their form of secular humanism, an explanation they shall all summarily ignore while they say I called atheism a religion, tend to not notice either. I'm not a creationist, and yet they believe that I am, and that I think the earth is only 6,000 years old. Doesn't matter even if they find out otherwise, because they will still find fault with that answer. For all, I'm obviously dismissing parts of my holy book arbitrarily, and deciding which other parts are true. Therein is perhaps the essence of time travel, though a curiosity of which path things could have taken if things were only slightly different. There is an argument for the existence of God that way as well. There's the fine-tuning argument which the same tribe of militant atheists who follow the holy religion of atheism, a term I use for secular humanism, and specifically their form of secular humanism, an explanation they shall ignore, as they say I called atheism a religion when I certainly did not. Always botch. That is the fine-tuning argument. The fine-tuning argument isn't just that God fine-tuned specifically the planet Earth, and only the planet Earth, for life. And yet they seem to act as if it is, because they keep saying, if we find another Earth-like planet, it disproves the fine-tuning argument. Because to them, the fine-tuning argument says the Earth is what God fine-tuned. God fine-tuned the Earth for life, and therefore God only fine-tuned the Earth. The Earth is the only planet in the entire universe with life, and if you find even one other Earth-like planet, it proves that this is natural, not supernatural. It proves that God did not do it. And they don't seem to understand how silly that is. Because if God can fine-tune one planet for life, he can fine-tune another for life. There is no reason to think he would be incapable of such. They also assume, of course, if there's natural explanations, then it cannot be a supernatural explanation and therefore cannot be God, which is silly in its own right, since God can work through nature and in fact created nature, which is the other problem they don't seem to realize. The fine-tuning argument is not simply God positioning the planet Earth in exactly the right way so that life can form around the sun. It is not simply that God, looking at how the universe worked and all the laws of the universe, took this chunk of rock and water in space that we call the Earth, and moved it and aligned it to its position in the sun, working within those fixed laws of the universe to fine-tune it for life, but rather that he fine-tuned the principles and laws of physics within the universe to allow life to exist. You see, it isn't just about positioning the Earth within the universe, within the galaxy, and within its solar system in just the right place for life to exist, operating within pre-existing natural laws, but rather the creation of those natural laws themselves. And yet they never seem to want to address that, as they gleefully debunk the argument using absolutely absurd points, but it nevertheless brings up what I'm talking about here. You see, questions about what could have been do not limit themselves to humanity even. What if life never did exist upon the earth? Even if it did, what if the Cretaceous extinction event never happened, which we still call the extinction of the dinosaurs? Though birds are dinosaurs, so there was no such extinction, completely at least. There was a man named Dr. Russell who came up with a dinosauroid, a humanoid that evolved from the Troodon. I found that rather silly. I don't really think a Troodon would evolve into a humanoid form. Oh, I don't find it silly to think that they could evolve into an intelligence as high as man's. No, that's not the point. But why be humanoid? I have no problem thinking of them developing an intellect much higher than the ones they had previously. But I see no reason for them to be men. Life may not have existed on Earth either. Life could have existed elsewhere. Or not at all. But even limiting to human history, what could have been is fascinating. At least to me. And yet I hate most alternate history books, or at the very least, if hate is perhaps too strong a word, I at the very least regret that they are not quite as thoughtful in their timelines as perhaps they are in their plot lines. Famously, for instance, there's the Two Georges, and since today is the 4th of July, I shall talk about it. I've always disliked that book's way of presenting an alternate timeline, because it is the 20th or 21st century, I can't remember which. America lost the Revolutionary War, and they're looking for this painting of George Washington with George III and all, but all of the people in it are the people that existed within our timeline who all held similar prominent positions. You have Martin Luther King, you have John F. Kennedy, you have Lyndon Johnson. But why would these people even still be who they are and in their positions when the mass migration of people and the events leading up to their existence would be so fundamentally altered? I'm not taking this to a mystic level. There is a belief, for instance, in the well of souls and fate and destiny, but in this case, whether or not you pre-exist, and whether or not you're guaranteed a life, and whether or you're not, that life is guaranteed certain general types of experiences, you would not expect, for instance, the O. Kennedy family to leave Ireland for America and set up shop and have the same experiences that eventually led them to form a family and to produce John F. Kennedy and his brothers and their descent. Why would Martin Luther King be Martin Luther King if his life went very differently? And you have to remember, it's something Americans don't generally know, but Britain abolished the transatlantic slave trade in 1807, and while slavery endured in the form of chattel, race-based slavery in the British Empire until 1833, this was because people who had been slaves their entire lives and were too old, it was believed, to learn a better way, and dependent corporations and plantations and what have you needed to a transition period, that was ended very much more gradually. But it was ended effectively in 1807 because that was the stated intent. It was a step process, but it nevertheless happened. And Britain, while I am not claiming it was some utopia of race relations, never had the sharp racial problems that America had. Indeed, neither did Canada or Australia. Again, I am not saying that no racism existed in those places. I am not saying that at all. I'm not claiming that racial tensions never existed, but it was never the same as it was in America. And yet, in the two Georges, we have Martin Luther King, who effectively had the same general goal and mission. We wouldn't need that. He may not even have been born. At least, not as Martin Luther King. So why is he here? Why do we have Lyndon Johnson? Why do we have an American Civil War? It seems they did what a lot of alternate histories do. They took a past event, like the American Revolution, and then skipped to the modern era, and all they did was say, America lost, and then overlaid that very sloppily on American history, and while realizing it didn't all work, they simply went on a patchwork mission, making adjustments to historical figures, rather than starting at the historical event that they changed and organically working a timeline forward from there. You see, if Britain had won the American Revolution, while there's any number of things that could have happened afterward, including another revolution that would have been more successful, 2 or 3. Had Britain won the revolution and no further attempts occurred, it is much, much, much more likely that there would be no American Civil War. It is much more likely that you wouldn't have even had a World War II with Hitler. Regardless. Because all of these events are much more connected than people realize. For instance, the American Civil War, even though people don't like thinking about it, was fought by Southerners who still nevertheless looked to America's founding fathers for their guidance, and the Constitution of the Confederate States of America was very, very close to the Constitution of the United States of America. How could that be so in a world where it never existed? The people in the Confederacy saw themselves as fighting for the principles on which America was founded upon, after all. And, while I am not blaming America's founding fathers, whom I do not see as heroes, I see them themselves as a form of villain of history, in fact. But I do not blame them for this. Hitler and the Nazi regime in Germania, forgive my euphemisms, I wish to avoid certain problems algorithmic within the U and Tube community, if you know what I am saying. They nevertheless, this Germanian political party, derived its primary impetus from the same philosophy that America was driven from. We don't like admitting that, but it is nevertheless true. And it isn't like Benito Mussolini would have arisen without it. Benito Mussolini was himself a dedicated Republican, by which I mean he wished a republic and not a monarchy, and a dedicated revolutionary who only laid aside his hatred and contempt for the monarchy out of political expedience, but never quite to the point where he would prefer it. He always preferred a republic. The ideals and principles of the Enlightenment and the ideals and principles of republicanism are what animated Hess Lear. If you just read their works, which people don't do, you see this. Then again, the fact that people don't read the works is why so many lies can abound about them. For instance, the great divine prophet Hector Avalos Most Holy, blessed be his name, blessed be his memory, wrote within the sacred scriptures of the holy religion of atheism, a name I give to a certain specific form of secular humanism, and am not saying atheism is a religion, nevertheless to be ignored when I give that disclaimer, wrote that Hess Lear claimed the German Protestant churches were a great ally to German nationalism. Oh, Avalos quoted Hitler to an extent. He used Hitler's exact words, but he removed them from a certain context, where if you read the whole of it, his Lear was actually complaining about many things, many institutions, many groups, and how German nationalism was impeded by them. It wasn't just about the churches either. He mentioned things like industries, he mentioned things like the government, he mentioned other things, and when it got to the churches, he mentioned the Catholic Church, which he supposedly loved, and which he was supposedly a member of, and which allegedly he draws his inspiration from. And he says of the Catholic Church that by its nature it does not support nationalism, and that the Catholic Church is a great impediment. Then he compares the Catholic Church to the Protestant confessions, and says that the Protestant Church is more of an ally to nationalism than Catholicism, because of its nature and because of its traditions. Yet after he says this, he still nevertheless says that they shall only support nationalism when it suits their own purposes, but will abandon and even condemn certain moves to protect nationalism in others. He was actually condemning Protestantism in a way. He said that the Protestant churches were better at protecting German nationalism than were the Catholics. But nevertheless, both failed to support nationalism fully and truly. And yet the way the divine prophet Hector Avalos Most Holy put it, the German Protestant Church was a great ally to nationalism, and that is not what he said. Just as he never claimed Hitler, he never claimed that Martin Luther, the Protestant reformer, was a hero of his. He never said that. He did mention Luther, along with Frederick the Great, and along with Richard Wagner. But he did not call him a hero of his. And the reason I bring all this up is because people don't tend to really know what they're talking about, and even if they do, don't think it through. But without America, you can have no World War II. You can't even really have a World War I. And that's also why another popular saying, had America lost the American Revolution, then Hess, Lear, and the Nazis would have won World War II. Britain would have simply lost. This is a bizarre statement because it assumes World War II would have happened had America lost the revolution. But in addition, even if somehow all those other conditions remained, it seems to have this bizarre assumption that if America had lost the revolution, then it would simply not exist at all. And that Britain would have to stand alone against Germania. And yet, all those resources and people would still exist. Especially if you're taking the Two Georges approach, with all the people are still there, as in all the personalities of history. But even not going to that silly and extreme, why would America losing the American Revolution prevent Americans from joining Britain in World War II. It's not like losing the revolution would cause the continent to dissolve into a mist of oblivion. The simple reality is you would still have the land and resources, and they would more than likely, if still aligned with Britain, join the fight earlier, as Canada had in our timeline. And yet people still seem to think that makes sense to say, when in reality it doesn't even make sense to think of it happening at all, because why would either World War I or World War II occur? At least in the way that we imagine them. At least in the way that they did for us. Some great conflagration, some other great 2 world wars may have happened, but for other reasons with other personalities involved in driving them, even if similar ideologies were in place. Still, I feel a great wound in time, and feel something ought and else had been done. I feel as though patches and repairs need to be done to the flow of events. And it has always been something I have thought. I shan't keep you, dear audience, of whoever listens, but I shall say this. Without the rise of Christianity, history would have been very different, and contrary to the statements of those who follow the holy religion of atheism, the tribal religion within the self-described skeptic community, that great holy religion of atheism, which I remind you is a term I give to a form of secular humanism they follow. I am not saying atheism is a religion. I am saying something else entirely. I am saying their form of secular humanism is a religion. They'll ignore the explanation regardless. They fantasize, though, that a world without Christianity would be far more involved. Without the Christian Dark Ages, we would be exploring the galaxy by now. We would have warp-drive ships and be on other planets. That's 1,000 years of darkness and stagnation as the Christian Church destroyed all knowledge and reason. That's all poppycock, of course. It was Christianity that allowed the growth of modern sciences. It was Christianity that gave us our modern values. And while I can't be certain what would happen in any alternate timeline, because there's any number of possibilities, we do owe an enormous debt to it. And of course I see great deep truths in Christianity. I do not, of course, as the tribe calling themselves the skeptics who are not skeptical at all, they are pseudo-skeptics, say, based upon their tribal religion, the holy religion of atheism, a term I give to their form of secular humanism, a term that does not mean atheism is a religion, but only refers to their form of secular humanism, an explanation they shall promptly ignore. They keep vilifying Christianity. And they know nothing of history. And most know nothing of history, making that argument all the more compelling. And yet we do owe that. You see, even though I find great truths in Christianity, that does not mean I say of all other religions, and people with no religion, like atheists, are all just wrong and stupid, and I do not look at other religions as foolish and obvious fairy tales with no value. I find that in all of the world's great religious traditions there is at least some truth. And I am not taking the other out of saying all religions are equally true, and the discussion is more complex than they let on. Nevertheless, I do not view all the world's traditions as obviously false, silly nonsense. I do view them as having truth as well, but Christianity is one that I have always drawn the most from. And while I respect other religious traditions, I should like to end this video on a very Christian reflection. To ask of God that perhaps now that fondest wish and deepest desire be granted, in prayer and in thanksgiving, and in most earnest hope. And I should like then to close with one saying then, to quote from the Bible. It is from the book of Proverbs, chapter 3, verse 5. Another verse the atheist community has corrupted in meaning so they could vilify. They claim it means, do not think for yourself, just trust your religious leaders. Or rather, they think it says, don't think for yourself, just believe God. And in real life, since God does not exist, that means trust your religious leaders. That is not what it's saying. But by them saying it, they are declaring God does not exist. They do not merely lack belief, but they will never accept the burden of proof, you see. The statement, lean not on your own understanding, refers to arrogance. So when it says to lean not on your own understanding, but to trust God to guide your way, it is referring to not being so arrogant as to think you know all. It does not discourage thinking for yourself. It only discourages thinking too highly of yourself. Having said that, my favorite verse within the Bible is Proverbs, chapter 4, verse 7, which I shall be extracting from the inexorable beauty of the King James Version of the Bible, as it is commonly called. The real name of this translation, by the way, is the Authorized Version, but nevertheless, we call it the King James Version now. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 7. Wisdom is the principal thing, therefore get wisdom, and with all thy getting get understanding. Perhaps that is what drives me the most in my desire for time travel. Wisdom. The wisdom of knowing certain things, of seeing things differently, of knowing what could have been and could have happened. Or perhaps it is a silly childish dream. Who knows? Nevertheless, it is my deepest prayer and wish and thought and sympathy that we all gain a birthday wish today, of happiness and fulfillment, no wish of hatred, no wish of harm or destruction, no wish of putting others down or insulting or demeaning them or insulting and demeaning what they believe in, but of love and of compassion and of understanding of each other. So, as I sally forth to celebrate my birthday, I bid thee all their fond adieu. Thank you. God bless. And goodbye.